My community killed one random person a month to keep the population stable. Growing up, I believed every town had a bell night. Once a month, just before midnight, the church bell rang exactly once. Everyone locked their doors, everyone closed their curtains, and no one, not even children, was allowed to look outside. My parents never explained why. They simply said the same thing every month. It keeps everyone safe. When I was little, I imagined monsters roaming the streets. By the time I turned 13, I knew there were no monsters, only people. Still, nobody questioned the ritual. Our town was quiet, crime was almost non-existent, nobody went hungry, there were no homeless families, no overcrowded schools, everything seemed perfectly balanced. The mayor often said we were the happiest community in the state. Statistics even supported him. Stable employment, low crime, affordable housing. People from neighboring towns constantly asked why life here seemed so peaceful. We smiled, changed the subject, and never invited them to stay overnight. The first crack in that perfect image appeared when I was 15. A classmate named Emily simply stopped coming to school. Teachers announced that her family had moved away unexpectedly. No farewell party, no moving trucks, nothing. Her desk was empty by Monday. By Friday, another family had already purchased their house. Everything happened so quickly that asking questions felt almost inappropriate. Then it happened again, and again. Every month, one person disappeared. Always explained away. Always forgotten. Nobody seemed interested in noticing the pattern. Except me. When I turned 18, my father finally decided I was old enough to learn the truth. The conversation happened in our basement. Not because anyone else was home, because every family had soundproofed basements. That should have been my first clue. He unlocked an old metal cabinet I'd never seen before. Inside sat dozens of worn leather notebooks. Every one of them belonged to my family. The oldest was nearly 200 years old. He handed me the first volume. The opening sentence made my hands shake. The town survives because one person dies. At first, I assumed it was some twisted metaphor. It wasn't. The journals described the founding of our community during a terrible famine nearly 2 centuries earlier. Food had run out. Disease spread rapidly. People began killing each other over supplies. Then the town elders created what they called the balance. Population would never exceed the amount of food and water the land could sustainably provide. Every month, one name would be selected randomly. That person would die before sunrise. No exceptions, no appeals, no replacements. Births continued. Deaths were controlled. Over generations, the town transformed into exactly what outsiders admired. Prosperous, orderly, predictable. The journals even included records. Every single name, every single month. For nearly 200 years. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. Surely someone would have gone to the police. Called the state government. Escaped. My father quietly explained why nobody ever did. Nobody was forced to stay. Adults could leave permanently at any time. But if they left, they could never contact anyone inside the town again. Not family, not friends, not spouses, nothing. Anyone who revealed the existence of the balance risked destroying the entire community. According to the founders, panic would lead to riots. Riots would destroy farms. Supply chains would collapse. Then everyone would die instead of one. That was the logic passed down for generations. I wanted to reject every word. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Who carries out the execution? My father looked at me for a long time. Then he quietly answered. Everyone. I didn't understand. He explained that every adult received one anonymous task each month. One person locked roads, another disabled cameras. Someone prepared medical supplies. Someone dug the grave. Someone rang the church bell. Nobody except a tiny council knew the complete plan. Each citizen performed only one harmless-looking task. No individual could stop the process. Together, they made it possible. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It was divided into pieces small enough for ordinary people to live with. That realization frightened me more than the killings themselves. Because it meant almost every smiling neighbor I'd ever known had helped someone die, whether they admitted it or not. 2 weeks later, I turned 19. Which meant my name was officially added to the lottery. For the first time in my life. The bell night wasn't just another tradition. It could be my last. And I had no idea that my name had already been drawn. The first thing I noticed was how differently people looked at me. Not fear, not pity, something closer to guilt. Mrs. Carter, who had known me since I was a child, hugged me a little longer than usual when I passed her bakery. My old basketball coach shook my hand with both of his. Even the mailman smiled sadly before looking away. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Then I remembered what my father had said. Only a handful of people knew the entire plan, but hundreds of others unknowingly carried pieces of it. If my name had been chosen, some of them probably already knew. Just not in the way I imagined. That afternoon, I came home to find my mother baking my favorite apple pie. She hadn't made it in years. She kept asking whether I wanted seconds, whether I wanted ice cream, whether I wanted anything at all. She was trying too hard. I realized she knew. She just wasn't allowed to tell me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside felt louder than usual. Every passing car made my heart race. Shortly after midnight, the church bell rang. Once. Exactly as it always had. For the first time, I understood what that sound actually meant. Somewhere in town, a family was losing someone forever. The next morning, life continued as normal. Children waited for school buses. People mowed their lawns. The coffee shop opened at 7. No one mentioned the person who had disappeared. It was as if grief itself had become scheduled. 3 days later, my father asked me to help clean the basement. While moving old storage boxes, I found a folded envelope hidden beneath one of the journals. It wasn't addressed. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top were hundreds of names. Each one had a number beside it. My own name sat near the bottom. A red circle surrounded it. The date matched the upcoming bell night. I stared at the page for several seconds. My father slowly closed the journal, then admitted something that changed everything. The drawing wasn't random. Not anymore. It hadn't been random for decades. The council still called it a lottery. But every month, they quietly adjusted the outcome. People who questioned traditions. People who talked about leaving. People whose families had become politically inconvenient. Somehow, their names appeared more often than everyone else's. The balance wasn't preserving the town. It was preserving the people in power. I suddenly remembered Emily, the classmate who had supposedly moved away. She had spent weeks arguing in history class about whether traditions should always be obeyed. She'd written an essay criticizing blind loyalty. 2 weeks later, she vanished. Then came another memory. Mester Lawson, the science teacher who had encouraged students to apply for colleges out of state. He disappeared the following spring. Every story I'd accepted as coincidence suddenly fit together. The lottery had never been fair. It was a weapon. I looked at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. He admitted he'd discovered the truth years earlier. He wanted to expose it. Instead, he stayed silent. Because every person who tried investigating the council eventually became the next random selection. He believed remaining quiet was the only way to keep our family alive. I wanted to be angry. Instead, I understood his fear. That was the genius of the system. It didn't require everyone to be evil. It only required enough terrified people to stay silent. The council had ruled the town for generations not through violence, but through certainty. Everyone believed resistance meant death, so no one resisted. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, someone knocked on our front door. Not loudly, just 3 calm knocks. My father froze. Without opening the door, he whispered that council messengers never came without a reason. When he finally opened it, a man wearing a gray suit handed him a sealed envelope. No words, no greeting, just the envelope. After the messenger left, my father stood in the hallway for almost a full minute before breaking the wax seal. His hands were shaking. Inside was only one sentence. The selection has been moved forward to tomorrow night, they knew. Somehow, the council knew I had learned the truth. And they weren't willing to wait another month. Neither of us slept that night. My father sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, staring at the letter as if it might somehow change. It never did. By morning, he had already made a decision. He told me we were leaving town, immediately. No luggage, no explanations. Just the clothes on our backs and enough cash to reach the next state. For the first time since telling me about the balance, he sounded like a father instead of a frightened citizen. We left through the back door just after dawn. The streets looked perfectly ordinary. Children rode bicycles. Neighbors watered their gardens. The bakery filled the air with the smell of fresh bread. It was almost impossible to believe a death sentence had been issued less than 12 hours earlier. We made it less than 3 blocks. A police cruiser slowly pulled alongside us. The officer smiled politely and asked whether we were taking an early trip. My father answered calmly. The officer nodded, then casually mentioned that every road out of town was temporarily closed because of bridge inspections. There had never been a bridge inspection in my entire life. As he drove away, I finally understood. The council didn't need guards at every exit. They controlled the people who stood there. By lunchtime, every route out of town had become impossible. Construction crews appeared on highways that had been empty for years. Utility trucks blocked side roads. Even the small hiking trails leading into the forest were suddenly patrolled by volunteers wearing bright orange safety vests. Nothing looked suspicious, unless you knew exactly what you were seeing. The entire town had quietly become a prison. That afternoon, my father took me somewhere I'd never been before. Beneath the old church, hidden behind shelves of dusty hymn books, a narrow staircase descended into a stone tunnel. At the end stood a heavy steel door. Inside was a room lined with maps, journals, faded photographs, and newspaper clippings stretching back almost a century. My father wasn't the first person to discover the truth. He was only the latest. Generations before him had tried to stop the balance. Every attempt had failed. One journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor. She had uncovered proof that the lottery was manipulated in 1964. 3 days later, she became the monthly selection. Another journal belonged to a doctor who questioned why perfectly healthy people kept disappearing. He died before publishing his findings. Every notebook ended the same way. Hope, investigation, silence. I looked at my father. He admitted the room wasn't built by the council. It had been built by people who wanted to destroy it. None of them survived long enough. Then he handed me one final notebook. Unlike the others, most of its pages were blank. Only the first page contained writing. If you're reading this, we failed. Your generation is our last chance. Tucked inside the back cover was something unexpected. A map, not of the town, of the tunnels beneath it. According to the markings, nearly every important building was connected underground. The church, town hall, the police station, the council chamber. One passage led to a place simply labeled archives. My father explained that no ordinary citizen had ever entered the archives. Every record, every real lottery, every manipulated vote, every death certificate, everything would be stored there. If we could expose those records, the entire system might collapse. It was the first hopeful idea I'd heard since learning the truth. Then we heard footsteps, not above us. Inside the tunnels, slow, measured, more than one person. Someone else knew about the hidden room. My father quickly extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed everything. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped, directly outside the steel door. A calm voice echoed through the hallway. No shouting, no threats, just quiet certainty. The council appreciates curiosity. A long pause followed. But curiosity has always been bad for the town. The doorknob slowly began to turn. And we realized, they hadn't come to arrest us. They had come to make sure neither of us ever left those tunnels alive. My father quietly reached for my arm. He didn't panic. He simply pointed toward a narrow passage hidden behind one of the bookshelves. The journals had mentioned emergency exits. I had assumed they were only stories. They weren't. As the steel door began to creak open, we slipped into the narrow tunnel and pulled the stone panel shut behind us. We could hear voices on the other side. They searched the room for nearly 20 minutes. At one point, someone was standing less than a foot away from where we were hiding. Then, eventually, the voices faded. We waited another hour before moving. The tunnel map led us beneath the oldest part of town. Every few hundred feet, faded symbols were carved into the walls, not by the council, by the people who had resisted them decades earlier. Some had written dates. Others had written names. One message stopped me in my tracks. If you're still running, don't just survive. Finish it. We finally reached the archives just before dawn. The room was far smaller than I'd imagined. No gold, no secret treasures, just shelves, thousands of files, birth records, death certificates, council meeting minutes, lottery results. At first glance, everything looked legitimate. Then I noticed something. Every random drawing had been recorded twice. One ledger listed the public results. The other, the hidden one, contained handwritten notes beside each victim's name. Questioned food rationing, discussed leaving town, journalist, school teacher encouraging university applications, refused council appointment, family becoming politically influential, witness, page after page. The truth was undeniable. No one had been chosen by chance. The lottery had never existed. The balance was nothing more than a carefully disguised system for eliminating anyone who threatened the council's control. Emily's name was there, Muster Lawson's too. Even people I'd heard had moved away decades earlier. Every lie, every disappearance, every murder, documented in the council's own handwriting. My father looked at me and quietly said something I'd never expected. "We don't expose this here. We take it outside." For generations, people had tried to save the town from within. Every one of them had disappeared. The only way to break the cycle was to let the outside world see what had been hidden. We filled 2 backpacks with ledgers, photographs, and financial records before continuing through the final tunnel. It ended where no one expected. An abandoned storm drain nearly 5 miles outside town. For the first time in my life, I stood beyond the town limits. No checkpoints, no volunteers, no church bell, just open sky. Within hours, state investigators, journalists, and federal agents were looking through evidence that had been buried for generations. The investigation lasted almost a year. When it ended, the headlines shocked the entire country. The council had manipulated elections, falsified death certificates, bribed local officials, and murdered more than 2,000 people over the course of nearly 2 centuries. Most of the leaders were arrested. Others died before they could stand trial. The town itself was never the same. Some residents insisted they had no idea what had really been happening. Others admitted they had suspected the truth but convinced themselves they were powerless to stop it. As for me, I testified during the trials. Not because I wanted revenge. Because every name in those ledgers deserved someone willing to speak when they no longer could. A year later, I returned to the town one last time. The church bell was still there. Silent. Workers were preparing to remove it from the tower. One of them asked whether I wanted to keep it as a historical artifact. I looked at the cracked bronze surface. For generations, people believed that bell represented safety. In reality, it had announced fear. I shook my head. Some symbols belong in museums, others belong in the past. People often ask what the scariest part of the whole experience was. The monthly killing? The secret tunnels? The hidden archives? No. The scariest part was realizing that almost everyone believed they were a good person. The baker baked bread. The teacher taught children. The police officer smiled and waved. Each one performed a tiny, ordinary task. No single person felt responsible. Yet together, they kept a machine of murder running for generations. That was the real horror. Not that evil existed, but that it survived because ordinary people convinced themselves their small part didn't matter. My community claimed it killed 1 random person every month to keep the population stable. The truth was far worse. The deaths were never random, and the thing they were really trying to keep stable was their power. Thanks for reading.